Guten Morgen, mein Herren. Hey, on it. Another load of kraut chiffers.
That's 100 hats with shaving brushes on the side.
What if one of Britain's most beloved sitcoms was quietly undone by the very jokes that made it famous? What if behind the laughs, flamboyant characters and cheeky one-liners, there were hidden tensions, shifting social norms, and a single controversial moment that changed everything? In this deep dive, we uncover the rise, reign, and unexpected unravelling of Are You Being Served? A show that shaped British comedy and sparked debates that still echo today. Whether you're a lifelong fan or hearing about it for the first time, what happened behind the scenes might just surprise you.
Am I to take it that you refuse me permission to give my pussy facilities for her confinement?
I'm afraid there's no possibility.
It started like many classic comedies do, almost by accident. A department store, a group of quirky employees, a mountain of misunderstandings and innuendo. Yet somehow, Are You Being Served became one of Britain's most enduring sitcoms, remembered just as much for its laughs as for its controversies. But before it became a staple of British television, it was just an idea floating between two writers who saw potential in everyday situations. Are You Being Served began in the early 1970 SS, at a time when television comedy was starting to shift from traditional domestic setups to more offbeat scenarios. The show's creators, David Croft and Jeremy Lloyd, were both already known in the entertainment industry, though for different reasons. Croft had found success co-creating Dad's Army, another British sitcom that had proven audiences loved character-driven comedy rooted in specific, often nostalgic settings. Lloyd, on the other hand, had worked both in front of and behind the camera. He had experience as a writer and performer, and crucially, had once worked in a real London department store, Simpsons of Piccadilly. That job at Simpsons left a lasting impression on Lloyd. The store, known for its luxury menswear and high-end presentation, was filled with strict routines, formal greetings, and a very clear hierarchy. Lloyd noticed the unspoken tensions between sales staff and management, the way employees tiptoed around supervisors, and how even the simplest transactions could become a performance. For him, it felt like a world ripe for comedy, with its rigid customs and subtle social game. He brought the idea to Croft, suggesting they create a series set inside a similar department store. Croft agreed there was something there. Together, they shaped the idea into a proper concept and submitted a script to the BBC. At the time, sitcoms about retail were virtually unheard of, and the BBC wasn't sure the show would connect with audiences. The humour relied heavily on wordplay, innuendo, and exaggerated personalities. It wasn't the safest bet for prime-time television. Still, the BBC agreed to test it as part of a comedy anthology series called Comedy Playhouse, which gave experimental sitcoms a single-episode trial run. That first episode of Are You Being Served aired on September 8, 1972. To everyone's surprise, it struck a chord. The audience responded enthusiastically, ratings were high, and despite lukewarm expectations from executives, the pilot did exactly what it needed to. It proved the concept worked. The BBC quickly commissioned a full series, and the show officially began on March 14, 1973. One of the reasons the show gained traction so quickly was its memorable cast. Each character felt distinct, exaggerated but familiar. The casting was deliberate and careful. John Inman, who was relatively unknown at the time, was chosen to play Mr. Humphreys, a flamboyant, quick-witted salesman with a sharp tongue and a charming smile. His performance became iconic, and his character would later be seen as one of British television's earliest representations of queer identity, though that wasn't discussed openly at the time. Mollie Sugden was cast as Mrs. Slockman, the senior women's department assistant known for her bright hair and double-meaning remarks. Sugden had already worked with Croft and Lloyd before, and her comedic timing and ability to make the most out of even the simplest lines made her a standout. Frank Thornton took on the role of Captain Peacock, the overly proper floor walker who took his job very seriously. His role created a layer of workplace tension and structure that mirrored real-life management hierarchies. Rounding out the group were Wendy Richard as Miss Brahms, a young, stylish sales assistant with a quick wit; Trevor Bannister as Mr. Lucas, a cheeky junior salesman always looking for a shortcut; and Nicholas Smith as Mr. Rumbold, the bumbling middle manager trying to keep everything under control. From the very start, the show carved out a unique identity. The humor relied heavily on physical comedy, exaggerated facial expressions, and verbal innuendos that pushed boundaries while staying just within the limits of broadcast standards. The characters often engaged in banter filled with double meanings, giving the show a slightly risque edge that appealed to adult audiences without veering into explicit territory. Much of the show's humour played off the strict British class system. In the fictional Grace Brothers department store, everyone knew their place, or at least they thought they did. Junior staff were constantly trying to climb the ladder or dodge work, while senior employees clung to tradition and formality. Management floated somewhere above it all, often clueless and out of touch. This layered dynamic created a fertile ground for comedy, with the daily grind of a department store becoming a stage for absurdity. Even the setting contributed to the show's tone. Filmed on a soundstage dressed to resemble a floor of a classic department store, the backdrop allowed for simple but effective visual gags. Mannequins falling over, loudspeaker announcements interrupting serious moments, and customers causing chaos with the simplest requests. It was a controlled environment where small disruptions became the stuff of entire episodes. Another part of the show's charm was its willingness to lean into silliness. Whether it was a malfunctioning display, a botched staff training session, or a company-wide sale gone wrong, each episode revolved around an ordinary retail scenario pushed to the edge of absurdity. These plots were easy to follow, relatable for anyone who had ever worked in a service job, and allowed the characters' personalities to shine through. The success of the show didn't happen overnight, but it did come relatively quickly. As word spread, audiences began to tune in regularly, and the characters became household names. Catchphrases like, "I'm free." Mr. Humphrey's signature line became part of popular culture. It didn't hurt that the show aired during a time of economic and social uncertainty in the UK. With high inflation, labour strikes, and shifting social values, people were looking for escapism. Are You Being Served offered a kind of comfort, something familiar, exaggerated, and reliably funny. Still, the show wasn't without critics. From the beginning, some found the innuendos excessive, or the characterizations too broad. But for many viewers, those very traits were part of the charm. The cast leaned into their roles with such commitment that even the most absurd moments felt grounded in the world they'd created. By the end of its first full season, Are You Being Served had proven that a comedy set in a department store could not only work, but thrive. The BBC had taken a gamble on an idea that many thought wouldn't resonate, but the show's blend of workplace absurdity, social satire, and cheeky humour hit the right note with audiences. This strong foundation paved the way for the show's expansion, setting it up for more than a decade of television, spin-offs, and international syndication. But that would come later. For now, the show had established itself as something unique, a sitcom that turned the mundane into the memorable, and it was only getting started. When Are You Being Served first aired, there wasn't a great deal of confidence that it would become a breakout success. It was, after all, a comedy about a department store. Something that didn't seem particularly exciting or groundbreaking at the time, but the audience proved otherwise. Viewers were immediately drawn to the show's unusual setting, its colourful cast of characters. Slowly but steadily, it started to build momentum, and by the mid-1970s, it had become one of the BBC's most popular sitcoms. Much of the show's success came down to timing. In the early 1970s, Britain was going through a series of cultural and economic changes. People were becoming more open to humour that pushed the envelope a bit. Traditional roles were being questioned, and society itself was shifting. Are You Being Served tapped into that transitional mood. It didn't try to reflect real life too literally, but it exaggerated aspects of it in a way that people recognized. The tension between generations, between management and staff, and between genders all played out on screen, often with a heavy dose of comedy. One of the most significant aspects of the show's rise was its cast. Viewers became deeply attached to the characters, and it wasn't hard to see why. Each one had a distinct personality, and together they created a dynamic that was both chaotic and oddly harmonious. Mollie Sugden, who played Mrs. Slocum, stood out with her brightly coloured hair and her constant double entendres. Her character was strict but fragile, often trying to maintain authority while revealing moments of vulnerability. Her ongoing references to her cat, always phrased in ways that could be interpreted as something else entirely, became a running gag that audiences looked forward to. Then there was John Inman as Mr. Humphreys. His portrayal was flamboyant, playful, and packed with quick comebacks and physical comedy. His famous line, "I'm free," delivered whenever a customer approached, quickly became one of the most quoted lines on British television. Despite debates over what the character truly represented, there was no denying that he had charisma. He brought energy to every scene he was in, often stealing attention with just a glance or a raised eyebrow. Frank Thornton brought structure to the group with his role as Captain Peacock, the floor walker who took himself and his job very seriously. He represented the voice of authority on the sales floor, even if no one actually took him seriously. Wendy Richard played Miss Brahms, a stylish and sharp young saleswoman who constantly clashed with Mrs. Slocum over age, fashion, and attitude. Her character gave the show a more modern edge, especially in how she refused to let older colleagues push her around. Trevor Bannisting, as Mr. Lucas, added yet another layer to the team. His character was young, flirtatious, and always looking for shortcuts. He frequently found himself at odds with management and occasionally with his co-workers. But he brought a kind of youthful restlessness that balanced the slower, more rigid attitudes of the older characters. The combination of these roles created a workplace environment that was familiar to many, but also funnier and more exaggerated than real life. People working in retail or office jobs recognized elements of their own daily frustrations, and watching those frustrations turn into comedy gave them a reason to keep coming back week after week. Another reason for the show's rise was its smart use of setting. The entire series took place within Grace Brothers, a fictional department store that seemed locked in the past. That setting created a sense of timelessness while also acting as a vehicle for commentary. Many of the store's practices, from staff meetings to outdated sales techniques, were intentionally portrayed as out of touch with modern retail. That was part of the joke. It wasn't just about silly characters saying funny things, it was also a satire on how old-fashioned businesses struggled to keep up with change. And because it took place in a single location, the show leaned heavily into physical comedy. Staff navigating broken lifts, mishandling mannequins, and attempting to execute elaborate sales promotions often turned into full-blown slapstick routines. Props and timing became essential to the humor. But it wasn't just about falling over or knocking things down. There was always a layer of wit beneath the silliness, and the dialogue was carefully written to deliver subtle jabs alongside the more obvious jokes. Perhaps what helped the show cross boundaries was how it combined British comedy traditions. On one hand, it drew from the classic farce style, full of misunderstandings, overheard conversations, and mistaken identities. On the other, it tapped into a more modern sensibility with its character-driven humour and quick pace. This combination allowed it to appeal to a wide range of audiences. Its success didn't stop at British borders. Are You Being Served became a surprise hit internationally. In Australia, it was broadcast on public television and gained a loyal following. In Canada and the United States, the show was aired on PBS stations, where it found a niche but devoted audience. Even with the obvious cultural differences, the themes of workplace absurdity and social awkwardness managed to resonate with viewers overseas. British accents, strange department store customs, and unfamiliar slang didn't seem to matter. What mattered was that the show made people laugh. What's more, the universal themes of hierarchy, personal pride, and workplace dysfunction were something almost anyone could relate to. Whether someone worked in a department store, an office, or a restaurant, they could recognize those power dynamics and social quirks. That broad relatability helped the show cross cultural lines. By the late 1970s, Are You Being Served had reached the height of its popularity. It was consistently drawing high ratings and had become a regular part of British television schedules. Merchandise started to appear, including board games and books based on the show. It wasn't just a hit series, it had become a pop culture phenomenon. Then, in 1977, a full-length feature film was released, simply titled Are You Being Served? The movie took the familiar cast out of the department store and dropped them into a fictional Middle Eastern country as part of a company-sponsored holiday. Naturally, chaos followed. The film received mixed reviews from critics, who often didn't see much value in sitcom-based movies, but audiences largely enjoyed it. It allowed the cast to work in new settings with more extravagant sets and location-based humor. For fans of the show, it was an entertaining extension of a world they already loved. The film's success showed that the show had become more than just a sitcom. It had grown into a brand. And like many popular British shows of the time, it managed to thrive despite limited production budgets. The writing, acting, and character chemistry made up for the lack of flashy visuals or big set pieces. As Are You Being Served entered the 1980s, it continued to maintain its viewership. While it didn't evolve dramatically, its consistency was part of its charm. The audience knew what to expect. They came for the same characters, the same dynamics, and the same tone. In a rapidly changing world, that kind of predictability was comforting. For over a decade, the show offered a reliable escape, a place where nothing ever really changed, where the characters stayed true to who they were, and where every problem, no matter how ridiculous, would eventually be resolved by the end of the episode. Its longevity was a testament not only to its popularity but also to its structure. The show didn't rely on long-running plot lines or dramatic twists. Instead, it delivered short, self-contained stories that worked independently. That made it easy for new viewers to jump in and for reruns to stay enjoyable for years after their original airings. In the end, Are You Being Served wasn't just a hit sitcom. It was a cultural mirror, a comedic stage where social norms, workplace etiquette, and class tensions were all put under the spotlight. And even though it played those things for laughs, it did so with a sharpness that kept it relevant for far longer than anyone originally expected. While Are You Being Served built a loyal audience and achieved long-lasting popularity, it also became the subject of growing controversy, especially in its later years. What was once seen as cheeky and playful humor began to face more criticism as social norms evolved. Over time, some viewers and critics began to question whether the show's comedy was harmless fun or something more problematic. One of the earliest and most persistent controversies involved the character of Mr. Humphreys, played by John Inman. Mr. Humphreys was flamboyant, overly polite, and known for his camp mannerisms and suggestive one-liners. While the character was never explicitly identified as gay, the portrayal left little room for doubt in the minds of many viewers. At a time when LGBTQ+ representation on television was minimal, Mr. Humphreys stood out. For some, this visibility was groundbreaking. Many LGBTQ+ viewers appreciated having a character who seemed to reflect part of their identity, even if it was through heavy stereotypes. For others, particularly critics and advocacy groups, Mr. Humphreys represented a caricature. His exaggerated behavior, limp wrists, and constant innuendo were seen by some as reinforcing negative stereotypes about gay men. The fact that the character's sexuality was never openly discussed allowed the show to avoid direct confrontation with the topic, which some believed was a way to have it both ways, using queer-coded behavior for laughs without taking responsibility for meaningful representation. John Inman defended his portrayal throughout his life. He insisted that Mr. Humphreys was meant to be light-hearted and funny, not offensive. In interviews, he often pointed out that audiences from all walks of life, including the gay community, had embraced the character. Still, the debate lingered. As the years went on, critics continued to analyze the role, especially as newer generations looked back on the show with a more modern understanding of media representation. Beyond the issue of sexuality, the show's humor often walked a fine line with its sexual innuendo. Much of the comedy relied on double meanings, and one of the most well-known running gags involved Mrs. Slocum's references to her cat. These weren't just occasional jokes. They appeared in nearly every episode. Her character would frequently say things that, while technically innocent, were written in a way that allowed the audience to interpret them differently. These moments became a signature part of the show, and many fans saw them as harmless wordplay, but others felt the repeated use of suggestive humor crossed a line, especially for a show that aired during family viewing hours. The BBC did receive complaints from time to time, particularly during the 1970s and early 1980s. Some viewers felt the content was too suggestive for early evening programming. Despite these concerns, the network allowed the show to continue with its original tone. The writing was always careful not to become too explicit, and the double meanings gave the writers enough cover to claim plausible deniability. As a result, Are You Being Served managed to stay just under the threshold of what was considered inappropriate for broadcast. Gender roles within the show were also a point of contention. Characters like Miss Brass and Mrs. Slocum were frequently the subjects of comments or jokes based on their appearance, age, or perceived desirability. Male characters, particularly Mr. Lucas, often flirted with female colleagues or made remarks that, by today's standards, would likely be considered inappropriate. In the context of the 1970s, this kind of humor was not unusual. However, over time, it became more scrutinized. Workplace behavior that was once played for laughs started to be re-evaluated in light of changing attitudes toward gender equality and harassment. Despite this, the female characters on the show were not without agency. Mrs. Slocum, for instance, was never a passive character. She often clashed with her male counterparts and rarely backed down from confrontation. Similarly, Miss Brahms was quick to fire back at unwanted advances or disrespect. While the show's gender dynamics could feel outdated, there were moments where the women pushed back and maintained control of the situation, showing that they weren't simply there to be laughed at. Race was another area where the show occasionally dipped into controversial territory. While Are You Being Served rarely made race a central theme, there were episodes that touched on it in a way that would be considered problematic today. In one storyline, the store attempted to cater to a more diverse clientele, leading to awkward interactions and outdated portrayals. These scenes were intended as satire, highlighting how unprepared the store's staff was to deal with change. But in doing so, the show leaned on cultural cliches and portrayals that many modern viewers find uncomfortable. Unlike other shows that tackled race more directly, Are You Being Served generally stuck to class-based humor. It focused on British social structures between management and staff, between older and younger employees, and between those with ambition and those just trying to get through the day. These class contrasts formed the backbone of the show's comedic structure, and when the show did touch on race, it wasn't always handled with the same level of care. Still, even with these criticisms, Are You Being Served remained a rating success. Part of that came down to the BBC's reluctance to interfere with popular programming. When a show draws millions of viewers each week, it becomes difficult for a broadcaster to make creative changes, even if they're warranted. The producers, Croft and Lloyd, stood by their writing, often repeating that the humour was meant to be silly, exaggerated, and never malicious. Off-screen, there were also tensions and dramas that added another layer to the story of Are You Being Served? While the cast appeared cohesive on camera, real-life dynamics were sometimes more complicated. One area of friction was around top billing. When John Inman's character Mr. Humphreys became a fan favourite, he started receiving more attention from the media, and eventually his name appeared first in the show's credits. This shift reportedly caused resentment among some of the other cast members, particularly those who had been part of the show from the beginning. Mollie Sugden, already an established actress before the series began, was said to be unhappy about being eclipsed by a co-star whose popularity came from a relatively one-dimensional character. Trevor Bannister, who played Mr. Lucas, was rumoured to be frustrated with the increasing focus on Inman's role and eventually left the series in 1979. While the official reason for his departure was a desire to pursue other acting opportunities, many believe the changing dynamic behind the scenes played a part. Despite these issues, the cast remained professional throughout the production. The show's creators worked hard to keep the environment on set functional, even when there were personal disagreements or power struggles. David Croft, in particular, was known for his ability to manage egos and smooth over conflicts. His leadership helped ensure that the tensions didn't affect the quality of the episodes. As time went on, the show's relationship with critics became more complex. Early reviews had been mixed, but generally leaned positive. However, by the 1980s, more critical voices emerged. Commentators started questioning whether the show's humour had aged well. Some called it formulaic or too reliant on outdated gags. Others argued it had never been very clever to begin with and had simply ridden a wave of popularity thanks to its broad appeal and convenient time slot. But many fans pushed back against these criticisms. For them, the show was a comfort. It offered familiar characters, predictable laughs, and a reminder of a different time. Nostalgia played a huge role in keeping the show alive in people's memories, even as newer sitcoms emerged with fresher formats and more modern sensibilities. By the time Are You Being Served aired its final series in 1985, it had already weathered over a decade of shifting cultural attitudes and ongoing debates about its content. Its blend of slapstick, innuendo, and workplace satire may not have pleased everyone, but it had clearly struck a chord with millions. It stood at the crossroads of old-school British comedy and the beginnings of a more conscious, critical audience. And while the controversies surrounding the show continue to be debated today, they also serve as a reminder of how comedy reflects the society it comes from, and how what once made people laugh can later make them pause and reflect. As Are You Being Served reached the end of its original run in 1985, the show's cultural footprint had already been firmly established. Despite the criticisms and occasional controversy, it remained one of the most recognizable sitcoms in British television history. But the story didn't end with the final episode. The lives of the cast, the legacy of the show, and its lasting impact on British entertainment continued to unfold long after the curtains came down. The actors who brought the Grace Brothers department store to life each had their own journey, both professionally and personally, once the show wrapped. John Inman, known around the world for playing Mr. Humphreys, remained active in theatre and television for many years. He was particularly fond of pantomime and continued to perform in it well into the 2000s. Pantomime, a traditional British theatre form filled with exaggerated characters and playful humour, was a perfect fit for his performance style. Though his fame stemmed primarily from one iconic role, Inman embraced it. He often expressed gratitude for the opportunities the show brought him and for the audience's continued affection. However, in the early 2000s, Inman's health began to decline. He was diagnosed with hepatitis A, and complications from the illness worsened over time. He passed away in 2007 at the age of 71, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most memorable comedic performers of his generation. Mollie Sugden, who played the colourful and outspoken Mrs. Slocum, also continued to act following the end of Are You Being Served? She reprised her role in the early 1990s spin-off Grace and Favour, known as Are You Being Served? Again, in some countries, which reunited several of the original cast members. The spin-off had a modest run, lasting 2 series, and offered fans a nostalgic return to characters they had grown up with. Sugden also appeared in other British sitcoms, including The Liverbirds and That's My Boy. Despite remaining active for several more years, her public appearances decreased after the death of her husband, actor William Moore, in 2000. His passing deeply affected her, and she chose to spend more time away from the spotlight. She died in 2009 at the age of 86. Sugden's portrayal of Mrs. Slocum, complete with her constantly changing hair colours and infamous double entendres, remained a fan favourite and a symbol of 1970s British humour. Frank Thornton, who played the dignified and often pompous Captain Peacock, had one of the most enduring careers among the cast. After Are You Being Served, he joined another long-running British sitcom, Last of the Summer Wine, where he played Truly from 1997 until the show concluded in 2010. Thornton was known for his professionalism and was widely respected in the industry. He rarely engaged in the behind-the-scenes disputes that plagued other productions and maintained a reputation for being dependable and focused on his craft. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 92. Wendy Richard, who portrayed the glamorous and assertive Miss Brahms, transitioned into a new phase of her career after the sitcom ended. She took on a central role in the British soap opera EastEnders, where she played Pauline Fowler for more than 20 years. Her role in EastEnders made her a household name to an entirely new generation of viewers. However, Richard's life wasn't without struggle. Behind her on-screen success, she privately battled serious health issues, including multiple recurrences of breast cancer. She died in 2009 at the age of 65, and her death was widely mourned across the UK. Her career spanned several decades, and her contribution to both comedy and drama made her a significant figure in British television history. Nicholas Smith, who played the bumbling yet well-meaning Mr. Rumbold, also continued acting sporadically. While he never again landed a role as widely recognised as his time on Are You Being Served, he lent his voice to animated films including Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Unlike some of his colleagues, Smith led a more private life in his later years, largely stepping away from the public eye. He remained the last surviving member of the original main cast until his death in 2015 at the age of 81. His passing marked the end of an era. Trevor Bannisting, who played the cheeky and flirtatious Mr. Lucas, left the show in 1979 but remained active in television and theatre. He also appeared in Last of the Summer Wine, continuing a successful stage career until his sudden death from a heart attack in 2011 at the age of 76. Arthur Bruff, the original Mr. Granger, had passed away much earlier, in 1978, only a year after leaving the show. His death was one of the earliest among the cast and deeply impacted his fellow actors. Larry Martin, who originally played Mr. Mash, had a less prominent career after the series and passed away in 1994. Like others who had supporting roles in the series, his identity remained closely tied to Are You Being Served, a testament to how deeply the show resonated with audiences. Despite the loss of so many of its cast members, the legacy of Are You Being Served has only grown with time. The show continues to air in reruns across the UK and internationally, with many viewers discovering it for the first time through streaming services or television marathons. The comedy, though dated in places, still offers insights into the culture and social attitudes of Britain in the 1970s and 1980s. This series has also become a frequent subject of documentaries and retrospectives, with television specials dedicated to its creation, behind-the-scenes moments, and long-lasting influence. These specials often feature interviews with surviving crew members, historians, and comedians who grew up watching the show. They explore how the show reflected British society at the time, poked fun at class divisions, and offered a kind of humour that, while polarising, was undeniably impactful. In 2016, the BBC aired a reboot of the series with a new cast, aiming to revive the magic of the original. However, the reception was mixed. Some viewers welcomed the nostalgia, while others felt that the reboot failed to capture the unique charm and chemistry that defined the original show. The new version only lasted one episode, and wasn't continued beyond that. While the attempt reflected how much affection still existed for the brand, it also showed that some things are difficult to replicate. The original Are You Being Served remains a time capsule. It reflects a particular moment in British television history, when comedy was changing, society was evolving, and audiences were willing to laugh at the absurdities of class, gender roles, and workplace politics. It had a distinctive tone, cheeky without being crass, suggestive without being explicit, and satirical without being cruel. That balance is a big part of why it has endured for so long. Looking back, it's clear that Are You Being Served succeeded not just because of its writing or its setting, but because of the chemistry between the actors and the commitment they brought to their characters. The exaggerated personalities, the recurring gags, the unforgettable one-liners. All of it created a world that was both familiar and strange, absurd and comforting. Even as modern audiences re-evaluate some of the show's choices, its place in television history remains secure. It's remembered not just as a sitcom, but as a cultural phenomenon that captured the spirit of its era. The characters of Grace Brothers may have closed shop for good, but their impact lives on in the laughter they continue to inspire.